Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chris Barnard of the American Conservation Coalition and Representative Byron Donalds.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Barnard. I'm the Policy Director for the American Conservation Coalition, the nation's largest right-of-center environmental organization. Before diving into this discussion, I just wanted to start by acknowledging its historic nature. I'm a conservative climate activist, and I'm joined here on stage by Representative Byron Donalds, a prominent Republican member of Congress from Florida. And together we're headlining a discussion entitled Tackling the Climate Emergency. If you would have told me 5 years ago that we would be talking about this here today, I would have called you crazy. But here we are, ready to talk about this, and it really is thanks to the leadership of individuals like Representative Byron Donalds that we Republicans are increasingly coming to the table to talk about issues like climate change and finding common sense solutions to this. So thank you for being here.
No, listen, it's great to be here. First of all, I would tell you, I agree with you, Chris. If you had told me I'd be on this stage talking about this topic, I'd be like, man, you crazy. There's no way we're doing that. But I think a couple things. One, let's set a baseline, all right? If you were going to ask me my thoughts on anthropologic global warming, man-made climate change, whatever the case might be, I will tell you that from what I've read and what I've digested, that science is not settled. I would tell you that if you're going to talk about a change in mean temperature of 1 degree Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius, I would say that there are a lot of things that can contribute to that, and how much actual control does the United States and policymaking have on that. But I think there's a third conversation we have to legitimately have. It's what is going to be the future of our energy matrix in the United States? How does that deal with the issues and the challenges that many Americans feel we do have with respect to climate change? I think that's the conversation policymakers should be more focused on, where you can actually, you can have a compromise on certain things while still making sure that America's economy is prepared for the challenges it faces, not just today, but going forward into the future.
So obviously, you represent a coastal district in Florida, the 19th Congressional District. And while Florida is increasingly becoming more of a red state, at the same time, there are issues like sea level rise and extreme weather that impact your constituents. Could you talk a little bit about that dynamic?
Well, I mean, in Florida, we've measured sea level rise. We know what's happening on our coast. We get that. With my time in the Florida legislature, I spent 4 years there, and my colleagues in the state legislature have continued that work. We've done a lot of work around resiliency, around flood management, around flood controls, things of that nature. It's one of the issues you have to deal with from an infrastructure perspective in Florida, just because of the nature of where the state is. Everybody loves going, but yes, we are a peninsula. Those are things we have to manage. So I think that the key situation for Florida is, do we have the necessary resources, tax dollars, to actually mitigate and manage rising seas, rising levels of tide on our beaches? Do we have the capability to deal with erosion? Do we have the capability to deal with flood control? In Florida, we've actually done that. We've done it quite well. This is work where our governor and our legislature continues to fund those projects to make sure that Florida is prepared when it comes to flooding issues, so on and so forth. Let's talk to disasters. I was at the epicenter of Hurricane Irma. That's the last hurricane to really devastate the state of Florida. My city, Naples, Florida, was where Irma basically made landfall, okay? If you look at building design in Florida, if you look again, flood control design, so on and so forth, we were incredibly resilient to the fact that we know hurricanes typically aim at our state more than any other state in the country. So this is where, as a conservative policymaker, the question is, do we build the necessary capacity and do we have the right focus on these events so we can mitigate it for the citizens who choose to call Florida home? Florida's done that, and we're going to continue to do that.
A lot of young people like myself, and including conservatives across this country, care about the environment. They believe climate change is an issue that we should be addressing, but especially on our side of the aisle, there is a little bit of a worry about, you mentioned the energy matrix. How do we actually get to a zero emissions economy? And you're a huge proponent of nuclear energy as a way of getting there without sacrificing things like energy reliability or affordability. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, one thing, let's establish this. I think that the mindset around a zero emissions economy or a zero emissions energy matrix, I mean, folks, the technology is just not there for the amount of kilowatts we need to run every city in the country. Forget about just the cities themselves, suburban America, rural America, industrial America. The number of kilowatts don't exist to go to zero emissions. I know that sounds good in political speeches, but my job is not to give you a political speech. My job is to give you the reality. The baseload power of the United States right now is 20% nuclear. 20% is what the baseload is. If your desire from a policy perspective is go towards zero emissions or to continue to cut emissions, and you don't increase the nuclear baseload of the energy matrix, all you're doing is cutting off your nose to spite your face. Because how are you going to get the necessary energy for factories, for electric cars, if that's what we choose to do in the United States, for powering homes, for cooling refrigerators, for turning on air conditioning units on everywhere, even in New York today because it's hot, hazy, and humid. I know the 3 H's. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. How do you deal with that stuff on an actual systematic, individual basis? You have to increase the nuclear capability in your energy matrix. I know that there is the concern about two major issues. What do you do about spent rods, and what do you do about safety concerns? Well, there's technology right now that already exists that's only going to get better with time, where spent fuel rods can actually be re-enriched and used in advanced reactors. That technology exists. It is here today. The question becomes, is the United States going to still live in the 70s regulatory regime when the technology is really in 2030? Is the United States, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, are they still going to act like 3 Mile Island happened last week? Or are we going to act in the reality of that there's been 3 nuclear accidents? Chernobyl was awful, terrible technology. The Russian government was testing the reactor in a way it never should have tested the reactor. Nothing we would ever allow in the United States. That's number one. Fukushima, what happened in Fukushima was the tidal wave took out the backup energy system to keep the reactor cool. It wasn't a failure of the actual reactor. And number 3, 3 Mile Island, there were technicians in the room who made the wrong decision. If you actually look at 3 Mile Island, the reactor contained itself the way it was designed to contain itself. The actual nuclear fallout at 3 Mile Island, nil. Loss of life at 3 Mile Island, none. So these are the things that we have to have real conversations about it, not getting caught up in the dogma of power. If you want to get to zero emissions, the only way I see it with the current technology that exists today, and frankly the move of innovation going forward, is you have to increase your nuclear baseload. There is a reason why California is not shutting down Diablo Canyon. The reason why California is not shutting down Diablo Canyon, is because if Gavin Newsom did that, there would be blackouts in the state of California. And I know the group of people that does not help. Who that doesn't help are black dudes in South Central LA. Doesn't help them. It doesn't help poor families in the Central Valley. Doesn't help them. They're the ones who will be on the front lines of the real suffering. So if we're going to go to the mode of zero emissions, and I'm not saying that's right, wrong, or indifferent. What I'm saying is we have to be mindful of the realities of what happens when your energy capacity is not prepared, and who that actually affects in the real world, in real time.
Yeah, I think we have a pretty strong case study of that happening in Europe right now. And you really have two contrasting examples where on the one hand, you have Germany that got rid of their nuclear plants and started importing natural gas at the same time from Russia. At the same time, you have France that gets about 70% of its power from nuclear. Yes. And they are decarbonizing, and they have been doing that for a long time. And they're showing that you can actually move towards a clean energy economy with nuclear. But we're seeing right now is that Europe is hurting because of the countries that ideologically went against this power source. And right now the citizens and the countries across Europe are feeling the pain of that.
Well, I think, look, again, the conservative mind is a mind that says, okay, let me look at the facts and the reality that surrounds me. And then what's the policy that can actually achieve the best outcome for the most amount of people going forward? If you're going to have an energy matrix, forget zero emissions for a moment, let's put that to the side. If you're going to have an energy matrix in any country, in any society, the number one thing it has to be cheap, it has to be readily available, and it has to be plentiful for all the different decisions that people make in their everyday lives. Ladies, hair is looking good this morning. Some of y'all turned the blow dryer on. That's cool. You know, do what you do. Fellas, I saw some of y'all with the electric razor. Some of you guys tightened your beard up, my man over there. That's cool. Energy has to be readily available for everybody. Now, if you're going to bring the zero emission standard into it, now you have to make the second consideration. Do I just go zero emissions, full stop, regardless of other global conflicts that may arise, regardless of the capacity to actually build the matrix, or whatever the case might be? That's the part where I think all policymakers have to have serious conversations and get away from dogmatic responses about what the future actually is, what the future actually looks like. I'm quite sure the German government wish they still had those 3 nuclear reactors right now. I mean, I'm just guessing. I don't know about you, but I think they would wish they had them right now. Because as winter comes to Germany, the people of Germany are not going to be concerned about Vladimir Putin. They're not going to be concerned about climate change. They're going to be wondering why they're freezing in their homes. Maslow's hierarchy of need has not changed, folks. It still exists today. Today, it still exists. The Arab Spring that happened about 9 years ago now, believe we're not 9 years ago from the Arab Spring, maybe, give or take. What happened there? There was a shortage of grain. There was no meaningful awakening of that it was a need to dispose different leaders at that time in North Africa. No. People couldn't eat. If people can't fill their bellies, if they can't keep their homes cooled, if they can't heat their homes, societies will have problems. Policymakers need to be ahead of that. And if we want to go back to the zero emissions argument, then let's have an open, honest discussion about what gets us there, while also making sure Americans, especially people who grew up like I grew up. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, right across the river. We didn't have money. We were poor. When that Con Ed bill came in, I could see the stress on my mother's face. So I'm not talking about this as just pure policy. I'm talking about it as somebody who grew up on the bottom, who knows what it is to struggle and grind and rise in America. And you gotta have cheap and plentiful and readily available energy so that the poorest among us have an opportunity to grow in their lives as well.
So of course we talked about nuclear energy, but there are plenty of other sources of energy that will be part of this energy matrix that you mentioned. And from my perspective, we might disagree about this slightly. I think there is a role for wind and solar. There is a role for hydropower, for hydrogen, natural gas as a transition fuel. But one of the big problems right now that we see is to what extent the regulatory regime in this country is holding back energy infrastructure and energy innovation. To put a statistic on it, 42% of all energy projects backlogged under our licensing process are clean energy projects. Only 15% of them are fossil fuels. Obviously, we're talking about permitting reform right now in Congress, where you work. Could you talk a little bit about what's happening there and the need for more bipartisan understanding of the challenges facing energy infrastructure in this country?
Well, a couple things. First, when it comes to picking and choosing, that's not me. To me, if you have a dynamic marketplace, the market will decide what's the best position to go down. And I think that we have to be careful, especially in Washington, about picking winners or losers or picking the energy matrix we want to decide. Because truth be told, most members of Congress don't know what they're talking about. It's given to them by their staff. They read the script. I'm just being honest with you. I work there every day, folks. I'm a finance guy, so that's my business. That's where I came from. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, there is permitting reform that needs to happen. NEPA needs to be reformed in a major way in the United States. There has to be serious reforms. Truth be told, again, we're not talking about any of that. Again, I'm there on the Hill. Nancy Pelosi's not talking about it. I know the deal that was cut with Joe Manchin out of Virginia for the Inflation Reduction Act. Come on, man. I think Manchin cut a bad deal. Nobody's talking about permitting reform right now. Not happening. So I think we have to have these serious conversations, to your point. But when it comes to the type of energy you want, everything needs to be on the table. We shouldn't be subsidizing one against the other. We shouldn't be demonizing one against the other. The truth of the matter is natural gas, whether you want to call it a transition energy or a baseline staple, we need it. Because natural gas is the thing that powers everybody's home in the United States. You cannot disavow it just because of your own dreams and desires. That will not work for the country. And like I've been saying kind of throughout this topic and conversation, who suffers the most are the poorest among us.
I see we have about 10 seconds left, so I'll just quickly wrap up to, first of all, thank you for your time today. But also I hope this was at least an enlightening conversation for many members here of the audience that might not have heard this perspective before. And there might be things that you disagree with. There's probably things that we disagree with on this, but we need a vibrant conversation. And I believe Republicans and conservatives need to be a part of the solution rather than being sidelined from it. So thank you all for your time, and thank you again, Representative.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.